Hey, how are you guys doing? Thanks for clicking on Marathon 44. Wow. Hey, before we get started, I want to say hi to Clovis. Clovis is a 12-year-old little boy. His mother or grandmother, I don't know, Tiffany, gave me his name, said he likes the videos. Hey, Clovis, you ready for some Bigfoot stories, boy? Are you ready? All right, here we go. The man who wrote this email doesn't want his name revealed, and that's no problem. This encounter takes place in western Massachusetts, in my hometown. I live next to a state road with the hills of the Appalachian Mountains as a ring around my town. Before having this encounter, I never believed in Bigfoot. I thought it was a joke, people playing gags on each other, or that someone just saw a bear. I was a man of science. Where were the bones? Where were the bodies that we could present to the world? Until I saw one night. It was a cold winter night and I had just gone to bed. And I woke up around 2 a.m. For whatever reason, I decided to look out my window on the second floor. I saw it in my driveway next to my trash can, illuminated by the street light. Not even 20 yards from touching my house. I thought it was a bear, but as I looked at it more, it wasn't a bear. It was huge, bigger than any bear around here. I mean, it was massive, towering over my garbage can, standing upright, arms out. It had a head with no neck. What hit me was how it stood. Its back was upright and straight. Its shoulders were in line with its hips. Big shoulders, its entire body with coarse curly hair, and it had leaves and twigs tangled in its hair. Its arms were long, and they were strong with clear definition. Its hands were like mine, hands with a disposable thumb, and its palms were much darker than its arms, and it had big, dirty nails. Its legs were trunks of hair and muscle, and its calves were big and defined. Massive feet. If only it was looking at the house and not at the street. It was cold and I could see its breath in the air. The amount of steam coming from its mouth was like a car's exhaust pipe. A curious thing about this Bigfoot is that it was skinny. Think more of a basketball player rather than a football player. It must have come down for food in the lean winter months, desperate enough to go into a neighborhood for food. I went to reach for my phone. I looked back up and it was gone. The next day I went to the spot where it stood next to my trash can. I'm about 5'6" tall and the top of the trash can comes to my lower chest. That night the top of the trash can came below its waist and above its knees. This encounter led me to believe in Bigfoot, that the people that were making jokes or seeing bears really were not seeing bears, or they were telling the truth. I named this Bigfoot Curly after its long, coarse, curly hair. I have not seen it again. I do hope that it's safe and happy and with a family of its own. Thank you, sir, for reading this. I was once a non-believer, but now I know these things are real. You know, I'm going back to the Bigfoot Outlaw show again, but Bear, Jim King over there, has got several stories, and he talks about Bigfoot raiding trash cans. Matter of fact, I saw him about a year ago, and I actually got a video of him telling a story of how they do that, and he's looked into this quite a bit. So they're not always out in the woods in places that people don't normally go. Sometimes they come up into suburban areas and dig through trash cans. That's crazy. Can you imagine looking out one night under a street light and seeing a 8, 9, 10 foot tall creature, hair covered creature digging through your garbage can? I don't even know what I would think. But anyway, this is a great story, and thank you for sending it in. I've had it a while, just now getting to it, but it's great information. Thank you, sir. Here is an email from Aaron. Aaron writes, "This story happened to my father in Levy County, Florida, around 1978 at a standard bred horse farm. My dad was a horse trainer in north central Florida at this time. He told me this story and it started my interest in Bigfoot. So Dad said about 9 a.m. in the morning, he was training a horse that had recently been broke and hooked up to a sulky cart. He said that he had rounded the track and the horse started turning towards a huge pine forest behind the farm, parallel to the back stretch of the track. He said that was nothing alarming, as young horses always thought they would see things and kind of spook easily. He rounded the same turn again, and he said the horse was sideways on the track, trying to look at the same spot. Now my dad thought something was up with the horse, seeing or sensing something. The next time around that same turn, my dad said something started to scream like a woman but way louder than a human, and it went on quite a long time and in one breath and then trailed off into a deep kind of rumble. The horse, upon hearing this, jerked his head straight and began running as fast as it could and would not respond to my dad's commands. It ran full speed off the track and up the lane about a quarter mile to the barn and ran straight into the barn. My dad said he got off the cart and the horse was just standing there shaking uncontrollably. He looked around and said all the horses in the barn were shaking as well and trying to look where the sound came from. In the barn was a farmhand, and he asked my dad what that was and how it was so loud. The man told my dad that he thought they both just heard a Bigfoot. Dad said the guy was referring to an ongoing newspaper story that had been running in the paper about a guy tracking a Bigfoot from the Everglades to Canada, passing by that part of north central Florida. One last note about this story is that my dad said every animal on the farm that day, the dogs, the cats, horses, and everything, acted very quiet and subdued. The animals stayed very low-key and did not frolic or play around the farm that whole rest of the day, which he found was really strange. I hope you like this story, because I did. I would like to hear a Sasquatch belt out a yell, but I don't want to come face to face with one. For all you hunters that have ever heard a deer grunt in the woods and how it moves through your body, I can only imagine what a Bigfoot yell sounds like. Aaron, that's cool, man. I've heard on Bigfoot Outlaws, they had Matt Knapp's channel, the Bigfoot Crossroads. They had a guest on maybe a year or two ago, and she was a horse trainer from Florida. And you'll have to find the video. Maybe I'll find it and link it below. But she talked about a lot of activities with these horses and how they would braid their manes and other kind of weird stuff. And you know, I don't know about all that stuff with animals interacting with other animals, and I don't want to say exactly what I'm talking about here, but you adults can imagine what I'm talking about. But it just seems weird to me. But there's some activity in Florida, and I don't know where this woman was, but she was somewhere in Florida. And they had her on the show. Go to Bigfoot Crossroads and look that up and hear some more Florida stuff. An actual interview with a horse trainer down there. Okay, let's jump to the next story. Thanks, Aaron. That was a great submission. Thank you, buddy. This email is from Kathy. She writes, I've had several strange incidents throughout my life that could be attributed to Bigfoot activity. My late father even had an up-close daytime encounter with his younger brother in the mid-1940s in southern Louisiana. My father told us about his encounter in vivid detail, which sparked my interest in the subject, and my father was a retired Army officer, and he was not prone to fabrications. It is important to note that my father's sighting as a young boy was approximately 20 years prior to the famous Patterson-Gimlin sighting in October of 1967, which made Bigfoot a household phenomenon. This recent encounter took place when my oldest sister and I were traveling to Huntsville, Alabama from Birmingham on Tuesday, January the 29th, 2019. We had just turned onto the exit for I-565 traveling east off of I-65 north, and I decided to call my soon-to-be daughter-in-law to find out what would be the quickest exit to their house to avoid traffic. I placed this call about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As I was talking to my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, and as we traveled there for their wedding on Saturday, February the 2nd, my sister turned to me very matter-of-factly and said, "I just saw a Sasquatch." I was still on the phone with my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, and I responded to my sister, "What? Did you see something on the billboard?" She responded, "No, I just saw a Sasquatch." Even though I have had a lifelong fascination with the subject due to my father's up-close encounter as a child, my older sister and I have never discussed the subject of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, which is in and of itself very strange because she and I are very close. But honestly, this is one subject we have never discussed, so I really had to gather my wits because I was driving in afternoon traffic to realize that she was really serious. I then asked her to describe for me what she'd seen. She said she saw this hair-covered creature that she thought at first was an orangutan, but she realized this couldn't be possible, and she said the car was moving, and she had to try to determine what she had just seen when all she could think of was Sasquatch. Strangely, she didn't say Bigfoot, she said a Sasquatch. She said it was covered in red hair and had a wide face, and it was crouched down near a ditch, and the red hair was hanging around its face. She couldn't make out any distinct facial features. The creature appeared to be trying to duck and hide. She also remembered there was a cypress swamp and water behind the creature. I was glad that she was able to gather so much detail from her sighting. It is also important to mention that we were riding in an SUV, so she had a raised viewpoint. This event happened inside the Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge. I nervously drove to my son's home and we greeted everyone, but I was just flabbergasted. I could not believe my sister had just had a daytime sighting of this creature. There is a rather famous daytime sighting that occurred not far from her sighting outside of a Marriott hotel, where a hotel guest spotted a Bigfoot in a tree line. You and your listeners can listen to the details of this daytime encounter on Sasquatch Central, that's a YouTube channel, and the video is entitled Monsters of Madison County. I know my sister saw this creature, and it appears they are moving closer to where people are and are losing their fear of humans because this sighting occurred at 3 p.m. near a heavily trafficked highway. I hope by sharing this encounter, others might have seen it and will also be willing to come forward. I really enjoy your channel, and I so regret that I wasn't able to get out of traffic in order to confirm her sighting. And she signs off, Kathy, a Bigfoot believer. And, you know, that's the kind of Bigfoot I want to see. One from my car. Because I've heard so many scary stories about these things. And I'm not really sure. I think I'll be kind of amazed if I ever run up on one, like on foot, out in the woods. I'm kind of that way. I don't think the worst. The first thing in my head is not the worst thing. Yeah, this is, I think it's pretty common. I think a lot of people see them from their cars, and I agree with you. I think it appears that they're coming closer to civilization. Maybe the population's growing. Maybe they're just getting brave. Maybe they're running out of habitat. Maybe all three of those things. But it's fascinating stuff, Kathy. Thanks for sending that, and you did a great job writing it, by the way. Great story. This last story is really good. I'm just going to read it. The woman's name is Helen, and she sent this email a while back, and I'm just now getting to it. It's and I had to rework a couple of sentences in this, but wasn't a big deal. But I'm telling it exactly like she wrote it. Let's see her. She writes, "This encounter happened in Athens, Tennessee. When I was about 5 years old, my family loaded up in the car and we went to the grocery late one afternoon. By the time we returned home, it was almost dark, but I could still see the house and the area around me. Of Crammed into the back seat with all the other kids, I was closest to the window, looking out at nothing in particular. I remember this vividly. My father pulled up to the garage and I saw a large, dark figure come from around the building and head across the field into the woods. It had been right up against our house. It seemed to be in a hurry, its long arms swinging way out in front of it and behind it as it walked, taking huge steps. It scared me to death. Even though I saw it walk away into the field towards the woods, I was still scared because I had to get out of the car right there where that thing had been standing, and no one else saw it. I ran to the house and across the floor, and I crawled over a big chair in our living rooms to find a place to hide. My father had to carry me to bed that night and tuck me in. I don't know how long I stayed awake looking out my window from the bed. I didn't want to fall asleep because I knew that thing was out there and would come back, but I eventually fell asleep. The next night, I was sitting at our dining room table doing something, and from the other room, I overheard my father tell my uncle about the event. My father went on to say that when it happened, he thought I was just being silly or that I had seen a TV show that scared me. But when I then heard him tell my uncle that something had been sleeping in the old barn, which was just down the hill from my bedroom, I knew this was serious. Children can sense when their parents are concerned, and it scared me. It's scary to a child. He told my uncle that it was something huge and it had made what looked like a nest in the hay, like a hen would do, except 1,000 times bigger. He said the barn smelled horrible, like something had died and was decaying in there, but that he had never found the source of the odor. At that age, I didn't know anything about Bigfoot. All I knew was that there was a giant who had been sneaking around my house. It caused many nightmares for this little girl through the years, but I eventually let it go, and I didn't think about it anymore until I was a teenager. I think I was about 14 or 15, and my sisters and I were playing out in the yard on a fall evening. Maybe hide and seek or something. We loved that game. Out of nowhere, I got this feeling that I needed to start moving to the house, which was only a short distance away. Something kept telling me to get inside. I told my sisters that we needed to get to the house, and they just laughed at me. They knew I was serious, though, because in just a few seconds, they agreed and followed me. We had to crawl through a barbed wire fence that separated us from the house only 100 feet or so away. I blurted out, "Y'all don't look back into that field until we get through the fence." I have no idea why I said it, but I knew I had to say it. Something was telling me that there was danger close. We were all lined up going through the barbed wire at about the same time so as not to get our clothes hung in the wire. And then my sister screamed. She yelled, "Y'all look!" I made it through and I looked at her. She was staring and pointing to the hill on the other side of the field. Standing there in full view was that giant again, just standing there staring at us. He stood there like a statue, very tall and wide, but proportioned like an athlete. Very long legs and arms. He was built like a weightlifter. I could not make out the details due to the light. It was late in the day, maybe an hour before dark, and the sky was overcast. All I saw was a silhouette. That was enough. It was like a scene from a movie. It was far enough away that I did not feel like it could get to us before we got to the house, and it made no movements to come towards us. I think I stood there staring at it for a while. I was jolted back into reality when I felt someone grab both of my shoulders and turn me around. It was my father. He whispered to me, "Come on, honey, let's walk slowly into the house. Don't run. Just walk at a normal pace." My sisters were already in the house telling my mother about the whole thing. It was funny the way they were squealing and how excited and scared they were. They had run to the house when they first saw it and left me there. My father had burst out of the door to come get me. Again, I don't know how long I stood there looking at the giant. I still don't want to admit that this was a Bigfoot. I have the hardest time believing in these things, but I cannot explain these events. I do not tell these encounters to anyone. No one would believe me anyway, but my daddy and my sisters know what we saw. Still, my father says he doesn't know what was standing on that hill against the trees late that night. There have been other things happen on the place since I left home. I can tell you about them if you want, but this is how it all started on my family's place in the country. It affected me greatly when I was a child. Now I feel a bit more intrigued than I do afraid. I have seen something that only a few have seen in their lives. I think I am thankful. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Let's leave it at thankful for now. Helen, I'm a visual person. I can turn words into visions in my head, and I can just see that thing standing there in the mist late on a fall overcast afternoon, just staring at y'all. I mean, that must have scared you girls to death. But obviously it's not aggressive, or it wasn't aggressive, so I think you all were safe. At least at that distance you were safe. And what an unbelievable, cool encounter. I mean, to be able to see these things, going back to when you were 5 years old, that would have scared me to death as an adult. To pull up to my house and see some giant creature walk away from the edge of my house, that would put me over the edge. But you're a brave girl and a woman now, and I think that was a wonderful story, and you did a good job writing it, Helen. Thank you very much. All right, that's going to wind it up for this one. Thank you all for clicking and listening this far. Listening this far means a lot to me and helps the channel, and I really appreciate you guys. Okay, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.